someone who's always clever is Scott Grayson, and of course from 97.3 ESPN.com. As he does every single day after a game, he writes up his Grayson's grades on the 97.3 ESPN.com website, and he comes on the show to talk to us. What's going on, Scotty?
Hey, I'm doing all right. They got to give you a little bit of a break, man. I saw you there. It was a late night for you.
Yeah, seriously, they need to check my paycheck here. It's not Gills, man. I shouldn't be taking this invective, but that's okay. I sit in the seat, and I'll take it. Scott, you sat in the seat very close to me last night in the press box. I can only imagine what you were thinking when the Eagles were down 17-0 at halftime. And, in fact, in your story, you wrote that you were prepared to give Doug Peterson an F.
Yeah, I had already started writing up a little bit of some of the grades just to start getting a joke. Because, honestly, I saw no sign that the Eagles were going to move the ball, get one touchdown, let alone three, to win the game. And, I think that was the biggest thing. It's just, we'd seen enough times this year where you thought, okay, that wasn't good, but they're going to come out, they're going to fix some things. But you knew they had, two wide receivers at halftime to be able to go that were active. Eventually they ended with one. They had their three tight ends out there. It was just everything. No right tackle in Lane Johnson. Everything pointed to there's no reason why the Giants shouldn't be able to win this game. And somehow, all those guys on the practice squad stepped up. And, yeah, I had to amend some of the grades and improve some of them. And Carson made throws when he had to. And somehow they left Zach Ertz wide open multiple times. That, I guess, just shows you how bad the Giants are. And ultimately, here we are, and things are still somehow okay for the Birds.
Yeah, I don't know who's worse, Scott. Jim Schwartz for that first half of allowing Darius Slayton to beat them over the top twice, or James Betcher, the defensive coordinator for the Giants, who, the Eagles literally have one weapon in the second half who can beat you. And if you go watch some of the tape, they decide not to even double Zach Ertz. How do you do that?
Yeah, I don't know. That has to be the big question in New York today, because he was so wide open on the touchdown. And there were other plays in that touchdown in the fourth quarter that they got that he was left wide open. I don't get it. I think a lot of it, you look at what the Eagles were doing. I think that defense was definitely worn down. They were on the field a lot in that second half because the Giants weren't moving the ball all of a sudden. So, you got to credit the Eagles defense for getting the stops, getting off the field, and then the Eagles offense for wearing down the opponent. And eventually they kept, moving some things around with their formations at the line, and the Giants just seemed confused.
Yeah, that second half was a half of unlikely heroes, very 2017, even 2018 late-esque, Scott. And speaking of Scott, not Scott Grayson, but Boston Scott was the spark and the answer to all the Eagles' problems, it seemed like, last night, Scott. So talk about his day, 128 total yards, a touchdown, averaging almost 6 yards a carry, 11.5 yards per reception. Are you scratching your head saying, why hasn't this happened sooner, or are you excited about the big day and the future?
No, I think what Boston Scott provided was definitely, if you had to pinpoint one person that started giving that team spark, I think it was him. I think he broke a couple of plays, made some cuts. They got the rest of the team kind of going, hey, we can move the ball now. And it's not a knock on Miles Sanders. I think it's just more of what Boston Scott brought, a change of pace, definitely a speedier guy. And what was fun, and I think, Jeff can speak to this too. It was a different locker room in the sense that here we are talking to guys who were on the practice squad weeks or even, a couple months ago, and they were key contributors. It was fun hearing their stories, and these guys who have just been waiting for that chance, that shot. And it came for him. It came for other guys like Greg Ward. And, I think that was a reminder of just how cool the NFL can be for these guys who get that dream come true moment and take advantage of it. And I think he definitely provided that spark. I think he's going to give this, you look at it and you say, well, if this team could somehow get in the playoffs, do they even have a chance? Well, if they can get healthy, Boston Scott is giving you that third running back, I think, that Doug Peterson likes to have. And if Jordan Howard can get back on the field, and perhaps if you get in the playoffs, maybe Deshaun is able to come back. At this point, it looks like Alshon's not. Nelson Aguilar, if he can get back out there and find his hands, perhaps. There's some things pointing to the fact that maybe this team can get going, but I think in that game, in that moment, Boston Scott was definitely a spark plug that this team desperately needed.
Scott, tell me what you thought about Josh Perkins, because he kind of got thrown into the fire considering the Eagles went into the game with 3 wide receivers, and then you end up losing a couple of them, and it's, hey, here's Josh Perkins. He's a tight end. He's a wide receiver. What is he? Tell me what you thought about his game.
Well, I mean, they view him as a hybrid kind of guy. He can line up in the slot or out further, and he can kind of be a receiver/tight end. That's kind of the way they view him. And you got that sense when Peterson was asked earlier in the week, if Nelson can't go, are you expecting to sign somebody or perhaps bring somebody else up? And he said, no, we'll plan to use Josh Perkins. That tells you the confidence they had in him if they needed him to see a little bit of extra time. And, he did. I think he does have pretty good hands. Some of the catches he had were not great throws by Wentz at times. And, I think he's another player like Boston Scott, like Greg Ward, who unknowns, guys you would have never expected if I told you at the beginning of the season that we're going to be key contributors in Week 14 to come out and make a couple of key catches. And, I think he provided exactly what they needed from him. But, you don't want to have to go to that well too often. You don't want that third tight end to be the guy you're counting on to move the ball repeatedly down the field in the second half. So we'll see what the Eagles do. But what these guys showed you is they're serviceable. They can be counted. They can be thrown in cold off the bench and make some plays. And I think that's definitely what that team needed in the second half.
Scott, your grades on 97.3ESPN.com could be used as a fascinating study in the any given Sunday example or effect of the NFL, because if I were to tell most Eagles fans going into the game that the highest grades you were going to give out would be to Boston Scott, Josh Perkins, and Vinny Curry, and the lowest grades you were going to give out would be Carson Wentz, Doug Peterson, and Ronald Darby, I think most people would think the Eagles would lose this game by 17 points.
Yeah, I think you're right. It is fascinating. When you stop and say things out loud or you hear other people say them about this particular game, you think, man, really? I think you labeled it best, any given Sunday. And that's what this league is. That's what I think the NFC is right now. And that's where, you could look and say that if this team could just get in the playoffs, you get a home playoff game, and any given Sunday, you never know what can happen. And you're right. It was weird writing it up. It was, I think, like I said, it was weird kind of in the locker room talking to these guys who we normally blow by, who aren't even really much of a factor in a regular season game at all. And it was refreshing. It was refreshing to see, and I just wonder what kind of a lift that could potentially give this team next week on a short week in Washington.
Yeah, well, that's the big question for the Eagles, as we're talking about, Scott, is that once the euphoria from the win fades away and you start practice on Wednesday, or actually maybe even earlier because it's a short turnaround, you realize that the starting wide receivers against Washington are probably going to be Greg Ward and J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, and you're probably going to have to lean again on Boston Scott. And eventually, when you're playing these type of players constantly week after week, the talent level definitely catches up to the Eagles. So we'll have to see what Doug Peterson has, what Jim Schwartz has for the future as the Eagles get ready for another division game next week. And we know you'll be there. We'll see you on Fox 29 on the weekends as always. And we get to read your grades on 97.3ESPN.com. Thanks for joining us, Scotty. We'll talk to you again.
All right. Thanks, guys.